Hi, everyone. Welcome to this talk, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Developing Accessible Apps. And thank you for choosing to attend this talk because it's a huge conference and a lot of sessions going on in parallel. So I hope you get something from this. And let me start with a quick intro. So my name is AKANKSHA Singh. I'm currently a software engineer at JP Morgan Chase. I love doing hackathons. I'm also interested into Flutter, which is a cross-platform development framework. And I'm a Women Tech Makers ambassador, a community builder, mentor, and speaker. And those are my handles. You can connect with me on Twitter. I'm quite active there. So, yeah, my main aim with this talk today is to make people aware about accessibility, help them understand its importance for those who are new to this, and for those who have already heard about it but don't think much about it when they are developing the apps or their websites. So, yeah. So another fact about me is that I'm from India. So does anyone know what's the population of India? Yeah? How much? Yeah. Any other guesses? Yeah, it's 1.4 billion. That's the exact number. And if you see that, my friend, is the number of people who have some form of disability. So you can imagine that number is huge. It's almost equal to the population of the country, which is currently the highest. And you can imagine like how significant this number is and why we need to take into consideration the requirements of this huge audience. It is not only a matter of social responsibility, but also it is essential for fostering inclusivity and equal opportunities. So, the father of internet, Tim Berners-Lee, said, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." And that's what we should all focus on when we are developing our apps and websites. So, what does accessibility basically means? So, accessibility is making your products usable by as many people as possible. But when we talk about usability, making something usable is not enough because there is a fine line between usability and accessibility. And theoretically, when we are developing something usable, if it is not accessible, then it is also not usable. But practically, usability focuses more on certain aspects of the product, and accessibility focuses on different things that make it more accessible to people who have certain form of disability, and it makes it more usable. So, why is accessibility important? There are a couple of reasons for it. First one is obviously the moral reason. We all want to develop apps and websites and products which are usable by everyone. We want to treat everyone equally with dignity and provide them equal opportunities. And also, from an ethical standpoint, creating products, services, and environments that are accessible, it acknowledges the diversity of human abilities and promotes fairness. Apart from the moral reason, another important reason is the legal reason. So many countries have enacted laws and regulations making accessibility standards compliant. So there are a lot of acts like American Disabilities Act. There is a European Accessibility Act, and there are a lot of other laws that there are made that ensure that the products, services, and they are more usable and accessible to everyone. And in UK also, we have different laws, and one needs to comply to those laws. Otherwise, they can face a lot of lawsuits as well. And there have been a lot of cases every year, around 10,000 or something like cases come, the lawsuits on companies because they aren't compliant to those accessibility standards or the laws. So that can there will be a lot of fine and it can cause a lot of trouble to your reputation, your company's reputation. So it is very important. Another reason is the business reason. Obviously, you want to reach to as many people as possible. And as I told you, the number, which is huge. So there's a potential market and you would like to reach to as many people as possible. So that's another reason. Yeah, apart from all the reasons, I want to ask a quick question. Does anyone know what these are called? Everyone must have seen them. So, anyone? I mean, if you say like a specific word for it, these are called curb cuts. And basically, what curb cuts were made for, they were started initially first time in 1945, when after the World War II, when there were veterans who were disabled because of the injuries, and they were not able to use the roads very well, that had some like distance, and they were not able to use that well. So at that time they were popularized, and they were made for wheelchair people and people who use wheelchairs and who have some disability. But later it was realized that they are usable by cyclists, they can be used by mothers with the strollers, and a lot of people. So basically the curb cut effect refers to the idea that when you try to make something accessible for people with disabilities, it might also help others who might not have requirements for that, like for that use case, but it definitely helps. So that's basically what the curb cut effect is. And as you can see, so they are used by different users as well. And there are a lot of other examples of the curb cut effect in our daily life. There were features, there were products, there were things that were made for people with disabilities, but they are also widely used by a lot of other people, and they just make it more accessible for everyone. So to make our products or apps or website accessible, more accessible, we need to follow certain guidelines. And we all know about WCAG guidelines, which is a standard set of recommendation for making web content more accessible. And there are 3 levels to WCAG, and the starting with like A, double A, triple A. So double A is something which is recommended for everyone, like for all the websites and app, like they should at least follow that. It's the minimum standard. And triple A is the hardest level. It is, I mean, we cannot develop fully compliant accessible apps, but we can definitely try to reach a certain extent. So yeah, these are 3 levels, and they are based on 4 principles, which is we need to look into 4 principles when we are developing our products and to comply with WCAG guidelines. So first is perceivable, which basically means you need to see if your app or website, like it can be used in different ways, like reading a video transcript, like video has a caption, if it is operable, it is understandable, the information on the website, and how the user interacts with it, and if it is robust or not. So now that you know about accessibility, its importance, the guidelines, some of the guidelines, I will also be telling about some of the tips. But before that, we need to understand our user base for whom we are trying to make these apps or websites accessible. And we basically cannot categorize disabilities into like certain numbers. It is an spectrum. So it is like a spectrum when I talk about that. So people can have a permanent disability, they can have a temporary disability, and a situational disability. So according to like Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, they have provided a very intuitive way to understand this. So when we talk about like suppose touch, so a permanent disability can be somebody who wasn't born with an arm. And temporary disability can be someone has an arm injury and they are not able to use one of their arms. And a situational disability in terms of that, like somebody is a new parent and they have to hold their kids, so they are not able to use the screens, the keyboards, or something like that. So in that terms, like you can understand this is a spectrum, and we cannot categorize, but we can definitely look into some of the issues. As I mentioned before, when you try to make something accessible for people with disabilities, it becomes more accessible for others as well. So looking at like how to identify issues and fix them, so we'll just look into few like categories today, but as I said, it's a spectrum, and you need to do a very like in-depth research on different use cases and the problems that people face. But if we talk about some of them, so somebody who has a impairment can also be in different categories. Somebody can be completely blind, somebody can have just color blindness, or somebody can be partially blind. And there are multiple, like even somebody who is visually impaired, somebody who is considered visually impaired, they can have issues on a varying level. So you need to understand that. But before that, like if you are developing for somebody with some kind of vision impairment, you need to understand how do these people like use their devices, their laptops or their mobile devices. And most of them use the assistive technologies like so I don't know how many of you ever tried using talkback or voiceover, but for me, like it's really hard. I mean, because people who have a visual impairment, they use it and they get used to it. But even for a normal person, navigating, going through the screens, it's really hard and it's very annoying to listen to those voices and follow. So you can imagine, like if your apps and websites aren't accessible and they have certain issues like some pictures not having an text, or some arrangement of the buttons or things like that, it will be really hard for somebody with visual impairment to navigate your website or your app. So yeah, some things that you can do to improve the user experience can be using accessible fonts for somebody who is partially blind, or somebody with like a certain level of visual impairment. They like using accessible fonts and using bold instead of italics or uppercase can be really helpful. Making your websites and app dynamic, like using font size. So in Flutter, like we have text scaler to scale the font size according to the accessibility settings. So yeah, another thing is contrast ratio, which is very important. Even a lot of famous, like popular websites miss out on this, and it should be 4.5:1. There's a website called contrastratio.com, and there are other contrast checkers as well, where you can, when you are initially designing or thinking about the color scheme of your apps and websites, you can go through these websites to figure out which will be the best contrast, and if you are compliant with the W3 standards. So if you see you on this website, you can simply check between the colors, the background, and the text color. You can check what's the contrast ratio, and it needs to be 4.5:1, but within that limit. So yeah. So contrast ratio, like it is very important. It is 4.5:1 for small text and 3:1 for the large text. And when we are talking about like visual impairment, so a lot of people have color blindness, and there are like 4 types of color blindness, like in terms of what colors they can see. And for that, like if you're developing something and you want to see how your website or app is going to look like, so on iOS, you have simulate iOS color filters that you can simulate your app, and according to like different color filters, you can see how your app is gonna look like. And in Android, we also have Android color space that you can activate and see how your app is gonna behave. If you talk about websites, then you can have Chrome extensions. There are a lot of them which help you simulate these color themes, and then you can see how your website is performing and if it is accessible or not. Another tip is like refrain from using just color to give out the information. So for somebody who is like who has color blindness, might not understand that very well, like what the color means, if it is right or wrong. It is always better to give a prompt or some other way to tell the user that what they're doing is right or wrong. So in that way. Semantics, everyone knows how important they are for somebody who is using a screen reader. So in websites, like having alt text, in Flutter, we have semantic widgets where we can we can give the description of the buttons or the images. Giving visual, flash, and vibration alerts are also very helpful. Another thing that you can always check, it is always recommended to check the accessibility settings in any of the platforms that you are developing for. You should explore the accessibility settings in your phones, in your devices, in desktops, like whatever operating system you're developing for. Do explore those accessibility settings. It is really important. So for somebody with mobility impairment, something as simple as auto completion can be very beneficial. Providing them easy input support like drop down so that it becomes easy for them to enter something. You can give them an option to enter text like via speech. So voice input support is also very helpful. Also keeping in mind the touch target is also very important. So touch target basically is the area where the user clicks, and the button or whatever the behavior is expected, that happens. But sometimes when the touch target is not that big, so it might be really hard for user to click on that small target and for the behavior to like reflect on. So that's the recommended one for Android and iOS. For people with some kind of cognitive impairment, which basically like hinders their like something that hinders their mental abilities, how you can make the experience better is by using more accessible fonts that are easy to read. You can provide options to change fonts in your apps and websites, and providing descriptive links is very beneficial. So just writing click here won't be that accessible. When you give a small description of what is going to happen when you click on that link, just a small description can be very beneficial as well. So that's one thing. And a lot of there are a lot of websites and a lot of organizations that are doing a lot of work on it. So you can find more things you can do on these websites. There are a lot more. But yeah, when I say you want to make like your apps and websites accessible, there is no such thing as perfect accessibility or a site or an app being 100% accessible. It is impossible. There will always be certain number of users who might be left, for whom it might not be that accessible, but you can always try to make it as accessible as possible by following these guidelines. So like the WCAG guidelines, I mean, there are a lot of things and it is very overwhelming when you look at it. And you want to make your app accessible or website accessible, but you are at the end phase of it and you didn't think about it earlier. So that's why like it's always recommended to have accessibility first approach, because that will ensure that you don't have to worry about these things and having like thinking that it is a huge task for you. So it is always recommended to think about accessibility from the very beginning when you are designing your when it's in the initial development phase. Interact with users, get the feedback, and then it can be in a cycle, in a phase kind of in the development phase, you can keep on improving the accessibility. So that is something always recommended. And yeah, so you should always think about including inclusive design principles. So design with empathy and consider the diverse user needs and abilities from the initial concept stage. Conduct a lot of user research and engage with the users with diverse backgrounds to understand their needs and challenges, and try to incorporate principles of universal design to ensure that your product is accessible and usable by as many people as possible. Another, like Microsoft Inclusive Design, they have a toolkit which is very extensive and very useful. So you can go through their inclusive design toolkit and other resources. You can also, when you start developing and making, you should also educate yourself and your team. So maybe having some workshops or just providing some kind of training for all the members so that they can understand. A lot of times when teams miss out on these things is that when they aren't aware about these things, they aren't aware about the assistive technologies, the things that people with disabilities use, the devices that they use. I'm not sure how many of you do this daily, or like when you're developing, use your accessibility settings. You turn them on and see how your app or web app or is behaving. So that's really important. um, yeah, integrate accessibility in design workflows. So include accessibility considerations in design reviews. Use design system libraries. There is also a UK government design library, which is WCAG compliant, and they have different components and different design principles, and they have provided a documentation for mostly for public sector like websites, but they are definitely helpful to understand, like in terms of compliant websites and the regulations. So it is quite useful. Conduct accessibility reviews early and often. So perform accessibility reviews. Try to get feedback from the users, from your maybe there are a lot of team members who might have some accessibility or issues, or like they have certain kind of disability, and they might be within your company or within your firm, there might be certain user base as well that can help you understand the how accessible your product is. So it is very important to consider those things. Yeah, another thing, as I mentioned about the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, you can also, so that you can make a base guideline for your team and for your firm, it is important to document all the learnings, all the tools that you're using, how you are progressing. So you can document accessibility guidelines and standards for your organization and for your team. And when you do that, it really helps. Whenever you start something from scratch again, you have certain guidelines that you need to follow. So that really helps, and that will enforce accessibility in your day-to-day life and your day-to-day development process. So I talked a lot about what you need to be, what you need to do to make your apps and websites more accessible, but what not to be. We have come a long way from using such websites. Days are gone when we had websites which look like this, and apps that look like this. But even now, there are a lot of fancy websites, like people trying to use minimalism or some design principles. As soon as they get more popularity, you start thinking, oh, this looks really nice, I should use it. But before using those designs, or before trying to adapt to that, like you need to really think if it is accessible or not. So you need to check with the tools. So like this is New York Magazine, and you can see there is a contrast ratio issue. So there will be a lot of issues in a lot of popular websites as well. But like basic things like contrast ratio, or having all text in the image, or things like that. I mean, those are some basic things that we all can follow. So yeah. So a lot about accessibility and how you can integrate it, like how you can have certain kind of features and stuff like that. But now, like you have your app, or you have your website ready, and you want to test and see if there are any issues or not. So the first one is like accessibility tools. It's like a package for Flutter that helps you figure out some of the issues if you're developing Flutter apps. Um, as always, as I mentioned even before, it's always the best way to check if your app or your website is accessible or not is to first check the system settings or the accessibility settings that are already provided by the phones or by the operating systems. So there are a lot of accessibility options in iOS that you can enable and check how your app is behaving and if it is making it accessible or not accessible. So these are accessibility options in iOS. And the accessibility options in emulators. So in emulators, there are always less options, so it's not that recommended, but for just a quick check, you can definitely try that on as well while you're developing. These are accessibility options in Android. And then we also have accessibility scanner app, which is by Google for scanning your mobile apps. It doesn't like give a very it just like helps you identify a couple of issues, but those are the basic things that one needs to have. So like content labels, touch target size and clickable items and stuff like that. So that is quite useful as well. Yeah, some other tools or like Chrome extensions that you can use is like Lighthouse. It helps you identify how accessible your site is and also figure out the issues. Lighthouse is by Google and it is like free, so you can always have that, and Chrome Dev Tools, and you can enable, and anytime you can see what issues are there and what you can fix. There's Wave, which gives you like a more visual feedback on something it's accessible or not, like by pointing at the at your website, like at the same like the labels and stuff like that. Another one, I think a lot of you must have used Axe, which is like the most popular one to identify accessibility issues. And so it they have a free version that you can use to identify a couple of issues, the automatic issues. There are some guided issues where you need to, they will recommend something, but you need to see if it is really important to fix or not. And they also have like the paid version for enterprise as well, and it's around $45 or something. So yeah, quite handy as well. And yeah, those are like some of the tools that you can use. There are definitely a lot of them, and it's not something that you can instantly like do or like instantly start doing. It needs a lot of understanding, it needs a lot of interaction with the user base. You need to because it's a very sensitive issue as well. So understanding is very important, and then you should start a discussion within your team if you haven't already. So try to develop more accessible apps. And just my final thoughts, try to think about accessibility first. Always like start with something, because ensuring inclusivity in mobile apps and website is not only a moral obligation but also a smart business decision. By incorporating accessibility features, you can tap into a larger user base and provide a positive experience for all the users regardless of their abilities. And by embracing accessibility as an integral part of the development process, we can make a significant difference and make ourselves stand out within a lot of other apps and web apps. So, yeah, I would like to end with the saying that for people without disabilities, technology makes things easier, but for people with disabilities, technology makes things possible. So, I hope we think more about accessibility approaches and try to make things possible for people with disabilities, make our world more inclusive for ourselves and for our future generations. So yeah, that was all. These are a couple of the resources, and you can reach out to me on Twitter, and I will share my slides on Twitter as well. So that was just a quick overview of like trying to understand the importance of accessibility, and I hope it will start a discussion among yourselves if there wasn't any. So yeah, that was all from me. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, do connect with me. Yeah.
Why are there laws to enforce this if there are levels of implementation for it? I mean, is it mandatory to implement accessibility features in your product or not?
Uh, as I mentioned, there are a lot of laws for it already. European Accessibility Act is there for Europe, and every country has certain level of regulation and laws that every form or like every product needs to comply. I mean, if it is used by people, it needs to comply to certain regulations for sure. And I did not show the diagram, but if you do a bit more research on the number of lawsuits that happen every year, it has been increasing like a lot, like almost 10,000 or something in US. If I talk about like just one state, there were like 10,000 lawsuits in a year. So that's like huge. And if you miss out on something, you're not complying, and there's somebody who is not able to use your websites or apps or any of the digital products, you might have to pay huge fine for that. So it's really important before you start developing something for the people. You need to understand these things and look into it if you weren't doing that already. Yeah.
And in this case, the levels of
Yeah.
accessibility implementation are such that you're not liable for a lawsuit in case your product cannot actually offer such accessibility features.
It depends on like different countries and the laws that they have, but WCAG is like the standard guidelines that everyone always looks up to, and the medium like double A is something that people always try to have. So yeah, you can never have like the most accessible product, but you always needs to like you need to try to make it at least as accessible as possible. Thanks. No other questions? Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the cognitive disability. So I can see the other things you can test quite easily in terms of, you know, um, but with those, do you know of any decent tools to test to see how accessible, like a website or app are, you know, in terms of how clear buttons are labels and stuff like that?
Yeah, like as I mentioned, the Chrome extensions, they do help you understand like if image has an alt text or not. Like even for cognitive disabilities, as I mentioned, that using accessible fonts and stuff like that. So they do try to help you figure out the issues within that, but I cannot say for sure that for a specific disability and for the problems issues that they have, that it will be able to, but it definitely tries to help you make it more accessible. And I mean, you will be able to understand more with the user testing. And yeah.